And what he says is he believes that they were entertaining the idea of, keeping that option open and maybe heading that direction and so forth, but that by the time of the Iraq War, they decided completely the other way, that they would abandon all efforts in that direction. They would completely open their books wide to the international inspectors and basically, put their hands up and say, don't shoot. See, we're not holding a gun.
I do know there's some unanswered questions, and this is definitely not a reason to go to war or to increase sanctions about some of Iranians' interest in nuclear weapons, including contacts through the AQ Khan network in the early 90s and the Pakistanis in the late 80s. Mm-hmm. So, once again, I just have the question out there. We need to see evidence to support their interest in nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
But, just from a self-interested point of view, looking at the history, if I was the Iranians, and although I know that the Supreme Leader has put out a fatwa against having nuclear weapons, I think I might want them. If I had the United States, in this case, surrounding me in Iraq and Afghanistan with naval forces in the Persian Gulf, air bases all across the region, and various levels of threats increasing over time, and seeing what the United States did with Iraq and did not do with North Korea, I would wonder why the Iranians would not want a nuclear weapon. But perhaps there are reasons why.
Right, yeah, well, I don't know if we can believe a word that Khomeini says, but he claims it's religious reasons and also money, that it's just too expensive to have a program like that. That's what they claim. I don't know whether that's really true, but it just seems to me that until our government proves that they even have a nuclear weapons program at all, we should never give them that much of the argument,
Right. Completely agree.
Yeah. And here's the other thing, and this is your second point, diplomacy first, and maybe, I'm just the most naive young man in Texas, and I'm just using my imagination far beyond control here. But it seems to me that if America gave the Iranians some kind of golden offer, like, hey, look, let's just be friends and resolve all this stuff, that they'd be perfectly willing to be our best friends if we let them.
I know that you're probably very familiar with the 2003 Grand Bargain.
Right.
Which actually came from the Iranians to us, basically saying the exact same thing.
Right.
And unfortunately, we made the mistake of turning them down. I shouldn't say we. Cheney and his cabal made the mistake of turning them down.
Nuclear weapon, they would give it to a terrorist. Garazi, who you probably know, the former Iranian ambassador to France, and somebody who wrote a 2003 offer from Iran to resolve outstanding issues between the United States and Iran, which we've ignored. So there are a number of things Iran wants. They want recognition. They want us to unfreeze their assets. They want previous sanctions against Iran to be lifted. There are all kinds of areas about which we could talk to them and negotiate. There are a lot of carrots that we can use along with the sticks. Why don't we go that route?
Alan, that 2003 story about an Iranian offer is a complete and utter fabrication.
So everybody's lying about this.
I think
the Iranian ambassador's lying about it. The UN is lying. Everybody's lying about it.
The ambassador to France, a former Swiss ambassador who was a busybody. I recommended to Secretary Powell that we get the Swiss to fire that guy, or we find a new protecting power.
But what about the things
Tehran.
I mentioned about which Iran would like some recognition on frozen assets? Aren't these negotiable areas where we can actually try to have some common ground with Iran?
The Europeans have offered Iran virtually every carrot conceivable over the past 4 years, and they've gotten one answer back from Iran. We're not going to give up our uranium enrichment program.
Didn't Iran help us after 9/11? Didn't they want to help us with Afghanistan? Didn't they offer to help the United States?
They helped us for tactical reasons in Afghanistan in 2001, and today they're arming their former sworn enemy.
There is common ground, and we have common interests which we can use to develop a relationship and negotiate.
Not on the nuclear program. The Iranians are never going to give that up voluntarily. It's their trump card.
I think, especially as a conservative, that the best way to go is to engage the Iranians commercially, culturally, and diplomatically, with no preconditions. I think the best thing we could do for our own interests, in terms of some stability in the region and ability, hopefully in the soon future, to remove our troops from Iraq and elsewhere in the Middle East, that if we actually engage the Iranians, reduce the threat of violence and war, that the Iranians will actually change how they behave towards us. But I think we also need to change the way we behave towards them. And the U.S. foreign policy should not be regime change in Iran. As a human being, I hope for the best for the Iranian people, and I think, in fact, that if we change our policy and engage with them, that the regime will lose its pretense for being in power, Ahmadinejad, and you'll see democratic flourishing in Iran in time, and I figure in 5 to 10 years Iran could be an ally of ours. But ultimately, my interest is what's best for the United States, and what's best for the United States is to reduce the tensions and remove the threats of war. The American Conservative Defense Alliance is part of a transpartisan coalition called the Campaign for New Policy with Iran. Folks can learn more about it at www.newiranpolicy.org. And speaking about engaging with the Iranians, we actually had a press conference on June 10th, this last June, on the Hill. And it's really interesting. I think you and your listeners would be interested to hear more about it, if that would be okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. We had conservative and liberal members of Congress speak at a press conference, as well as Congressman Bob Barr, who's now running as a Libertarian candidate. On the conservative side, we had Ron Paul, and then we had a host of liberal Democratic Congress ladies. And then we had policy people, Phil Giraldi from the American Conservative Defense Alliance, and Doug Bandow, and then a whole bunch of more liberal-leaning policy people spoke. And it was really interesting, is behind the press conference was a series of red phones. And on the red phones were Iranians. It was the opportunity for Americans to sit down and talk to real Iranians. And,
I saw a picture of that.
Yeah, it was really, really cool, actually.
Now, so this is a takeoff on the hotline to Moscow, right, to get the Kremlin on the phone. Don't shoot. It's just a satellite.
Exactly.
And so you set up all these red phones, and now in the picture I saw, it's just a table lined with red phones, and basically what you're saying is Americans could just sit down, pick up the red phone, and there'd be an Iranian civilian on the other end, and they could just shoot the shit about whatever they wanted.
Right, and from what I understand, Link TV, who filmed the American side, also filmed the Iranian side. They're actually in Iran. And apparently they're putting together a documentary about the whole thing. So hopefully we'll be able to see it on television soon enough.
That is great. That's really setting an example there. I really like that stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
And, this really goes to the individualism, and this is something we ought to especially focus on with today being Independence Day and all that kind of thing. It's self-evidently true, isn't it, that all Iranians have the natural right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that when we talk about Iran, this isn't a shape on a map. This is an actual place on Earth where human beings live?
Exactly, and that's why I definitely support Track 1 diplomacy, where our people in the government talk to their people in their government. But ultimately, the more important thing, I think, is Track 2, where just general American citizens talk to Iranian citizens. Because if you start talking to people and realize that they are human beings, or recognize, discover, most people shouldn't be surprised that there are human beings, but some people get confused on occasion. It makes it much more difficult to engage people militarily if you start realizing that, they have families, they have interests similar to yours, they have aspirations and concerns, and they want the best for their children, just like you do. They might have slightly different worldviews when it comes to religion and other such things, but, that's the way the world works.
Right. And especially here in America, we're not supposed to care what you believe in anyway, as long as you're not trying to hire the Congress to do something to us about it. Thomas Jefferson said, I care not about my neighbor's religion. If he has one God or 10, it neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg.
I like that. That's nice.
All right, now, reason number 3, war is the health of the state. Never mind those Iranians. If we want to be free, we need to oppose war overseas. How's that?
Completely. Yes, right on. If we look at what's happened since 9/11, and even prior to 9/11, but we'll just stick with 9/11 forward, we have things such as the Patriot Act, the National Security Letters, the 215 orders, the sneak and peek, the National ID through Real ID. We now have border searches for your PDAs and phones and computers, domestic use of military satellites. It's just really disturbing and pretty disgusting if you think about it, how we've let kind of a police state to continue to develop since 9/11.
Isn't it ironic that the number one slogan on the side of the war party is simply that they're fighting for our freedom during all this?
I think Orwell was right. You need to really look at language. And, they're not fighting for our freedom. You and I know that, and hopefully many Americans know that. But this is not an issue that you and I will necessarily get into this call, but our education system has indoctrinated generations of American citizens not to think critically or rationally. And therefore, when they hear things such as, we're fighting for your freedom, we're fighting for democracy, people unfortunately believe that. because they don't understand in their hearts and in their minds what freedom is really all about.